Welcome to Tech Leaders Today with your host, Cassie Crossley. All comments, views, and opinions expressed on this show are strictly those of the host, guests, and callers. Now here's Cassie Crossley.
Welcome to Tech Leaders Today. I'm your host, Cassie Crossley, and I'm here with Karl Smith, who is the CEO of Paradigm Interactions Incorporated. Karl is an inventor of open network IoT3 UbiNET, which he has patented, and a holistic transformation consultant more involved with how humans have to deal with technology than technology itself. Karl is also former Global Head of Mobility User Experience at Accenture and Partner, founder, Global Head of Digital Design at Wipro Digital, current Chairman of the Human-Centered Design Society, and has relaunched or launched design as a USP in several global enterprises. Welcome, Karl.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. There is so much that you're working with today. Can you tell me what your focus on is right at the moment?
I'm really focused on enabling people. I think a lot of our work in technology, we're interested in boxes, but actually I'm interested in people trying to use those boxes to get something done. And that's my main focus at the moment.
And the people that you're working with, let's talk about technology people. How do you attract or retain people in the industries that you're working with? Because there's such a challenge in the fight for highly competent resources. So what are you finding these days?
First of all, I don't work in a standard model. So we're an associate network. People work together because they want to work together. You're not tied down to a formal job, which is actually quite liberating for most people. And the reason that we want to work together is because we know that the people we're talking with and working with know what they're talking about. It's not a bunch of buzzwords. It's a very well-known and understood behavior and consultancy. And for the main part, that's user experience, or focused on how users have to utilize technology.
So when you're working with those resources, they are more, let's say, more senior in nature, or do you find them at all various points?
I have a very liberal attitude to skills. In fact, I was telling someone yesterday, I never employ interns when I'm working with clients. If I'm setting up a design division or a capability for someone, I actually employ people because if they're good enough to do the job, then they should be paid. I will hire people directly from universities if they have actually understood and can enact what they've learned rather than repeat it parrot fashion. I've hired people who are mid to senior level who want to not so much necessarily become managers, but actually just do more and more interesting work. And I think this is an interesting dichotomy with user experience people. They're actually less focused on grandiose careers and more interested in actually making the world better. You know, good user experience is not about something that looks flashy. It's something that's usable and that people will come back and use over and over again and not have problems and stresses about not phone up support because they can work it out for themselves from what's in front of them.
User experience is a hard field, in my opinion, maybe because I don't have the skill set to design a well-developed user interface. I can know it when I see it, but how do you find those people? Do you look at their portfolios? Where is that? Because you could go for years and years of schooling and still not be that good.
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing is there's no one route to user experience. You know, I wouldn't necessarily assume that either a scientist or a designer has got the skills to do user experience. A lot of the time, people are focused on the UIs, when actually that's just the presentation layer. UX is not skin deep. It goes all the way through the technology. It enables people to call data that they need as quickly as they need it. It stages the data. It allows you to interact with it and change it and then send it on its journey again. The ability to understand the complexities around that, but more importantly, not to make your own decision about what people want to do. People keep asking, what's your opinion, Karl, for the user experience in this? And then my answer is, I have no opinion. I'm going to go and ask the target audience what their opinion is against this task that needs to be done. So it's not just the opinion, it's the task that needs to be done and the people who would be using it that actually matter rather than me. And it's a listening discipline.
That's a great point. The end-to-end user experience is really what you're looking at. It's not just what is up on the screen. I mean, it happens every day. You could get to the right screen, but if it took you 5 different ways to get there and it was complicated, it's not very easy. You have to know what people are looking for and what their full intention is.
Yeah, and also it's not just that. Businesses have channeled their activity into online, offline, telephone support. Customers don't care about the organizational structure of businesses. They care about, can I do what I came here to do? If I can't, when I do phone up support, can they see the screen I'm working on? Can they understand my problem, or are they just working to a script and they run me through the script as though I've not experienced the last 2 hours of pain trying to get something bought? It's a holistic approach, user experience. It's not just one piece of tech in the wilderness without ever considering all the other ancillary things that happen around it.
Excellent point. And you're working with technologists on IoT and blockchain. Tell me more about how you find the right people for that, because in new areas such as this, they don't have years of experience. So what are you looking for those really thought leaders that are ready to go deep into those topics?
I think that the naming of them kind of gives the impression that they're completely new. That's one thing. So blockchain is simply a distributed database that allows information to be shared through something called smart contracts. So it's not actually completely new technology. I gave a talk last year at the conference, and I said, when someone says blockchain to you, just change the word for database. Now it's beginning to make sense. The actual people who build this stuff are relatively rare, but the people that need it is almost everyone. So there is definitely a gap in supply and demand. As far as Internet of Things goes, we're still sort of in the baby steps. We're still, for the most part, thinking about smart devices, whereas the Internet of Things is everything connected, where in fact you are inside the environment and the chair that you're sitting in is connected. The table you're leaning on is connected. And people will go, why would the chair and table need to be connected? Well, if it was built and materials went into it and effort went into it and it was sold, then you can actually trace the life cycle of an entire object all the way through it, from creation to recycling. You can validate whether or not it was bought and how it was bought. You can deal with insurance by saying it's in my home. And because it's chipped, we'll know where it is. So if someone does steal it as they're driving down the road with your desk, the desk is shouting out to the rest of the Internet of Things, I'm being stolen. It's a very different way of doing things. I think it's really quite exciting. It's certainly challenging for me because, having worked in user experience for a long time, almost everything we work with ends up in some kind of graphic user interface. In the Internet of Things, there's very few graphic interfaces. Most of it's voice controlled. We, in user experience, are having to change how we think about it. The underlying processes that we do are the same. We're still thinking about what is the user's mental model, how are they acquiring something, how are they utilizing it. But actually, how they're interacting with it is completely different.
I hadn't thought about that ability to put the IoT really into devices that are not necessarily electronic in nature. Do you see any companies that are currently doing that?
Well, actually, Gap did it for years with their clothes when they were doing their RFID tagging, so that they would know where the clothing was, where it was being shipped to. I think they were meant to switch off the tagging after clothing was bought. I don't know if they have or not. There's already systems around that if you are wearing tagged clothes and you walk into the shop will know if they have anything in your size. Someone I know, when I worked in Accenture, worked on a mirror that would show you wearing clothes that weren't physically there. And that communication was actually done through tagging, again, about what you like to wear and how it could be played onto you. So I think that all of the experiences that we currently have, the quite mundane things that we have to do, are up for grabs in an IoT world, which is very interesting. It's not just the technology piece, it's whole social change as well. The most common question I get asked about the IoT is, when do we all get it all? I'm going, unfortunately, not everyone's going to get it, because the countries that have it have to have the infrastructure to run it. And lots of countries have not invested in infrastructure at all.
The infrastructure to run it is more about essentially billions of amounts of data.
Yes.
Is that what you're talking about?
Well, no, I'm talking about, the Internet of Things is still an internet. The internet has been around since the 1940s. Most people, when you say internet, think of the World Wide Web. It's only one version of the internet. I still use bulletin board services to get updates on security patches. because they're the quickest way to get them. If I said to someone in their 20s now, have you ever used a bulletin board service? They'd look at me like I was crazy because they wouldn't be aware that that was a form of internet. Countries that have actually spent a lot of money, Europe spent a huge amount on infrastructure for the internet. I know the US has in patches, but not over the whole country. And then there are countries that have not spent anything. You know, they are relying upon low-tech mobile devices to deliver internet services, but there is no infrastructure to manage the huge amounts of data that would be related in the Internet of Things.
Yeah, I've run into the same thing in regards to the discussion of, well, that's not really a new concept. You've brought that up a couple times. My father was a patent holder on pieces of ARPANET when he was with IBM.
Yeah.
It's all come around. It's just under a different name sometimes.
I think it's interesting because it's the marketing. You know, ubiquitous computing has been around for a very long time, and the concept has been around for a huge amount of time. The fact that it's now called Internet of Things makes it easier for people to relate to. But actually, the understanding of how it can work has been around for years and years and years. What's useful is that the technology to make it work is being miniaturized. We're now looking at ambient power systems instead of sensors having to be tied onto landlines of power or for having batteries. They can actually use sunlight. And I think then we start to change then how we think about networks, because actually the networks don't need to be tied into power lines. And I think that's kind of where we're getting into what could be considered science fiction, apart from the fact that all of the tech to do it exists. We're not building new tech. It's just we're using what we've got differently.
Good point. What projects or initiatives are you working on that are exciting to you today?
I'm still working on my open network protocol. There's some more depths I need to plumb of it, and specifically to do with the digital products and services, the big data piece, because the actual cost of setting these things up is extraordinarily high. And for businesses to want to be involved, and we need pretty much all businesses involved, they're going to have to see a return on investment. So I'm looking at how do we qualify return on investment in the Internet of Things, and how do they see their businesses evolving? I mean, I have for the last couple of years done consultancy related to digital productization, because we have a notion of things that we buy, but actually they have a digital nature as well. And we need to be able to virtualize those products and services into a communicable set of data that is shared across countries, across languages, and to be immediately understood. Now, that project is something that I've been playing with for a while. And actually, if I go to government people, they look at me like I'm mad, as in, why would we want that? And I'm going, well, if you don't understand Internet of Things, there's every chance that we could get rid of governments, we could get rid of security services, we could get rid of, I don't know, loads of different normal things that we consider now, because we don't really need them. So either you're involved or you're definitely not involved in the future.
How do you get rid of security?
The police are a response service based around transactions or issues. So say I live in an Internet of Things house, and I'm wearing Internet of Things clothing, and my whole neighborhood, everyone wears Internet of Things clothing, and someone comes to my house wearing no Internet of Things clothing, no IDs. The house contacts a local security force and says there is an intruder or someone who's potentially a threat, because they are hiding their identity. People look at the active actions and they forget that you can draw conclusions from people's behavior that's different as well. The IoT system I've designed uses blockchain as a secondary security protocol. So you can't actually add something, no one can add themselves. So you know the issue with the internet is it works on a handshake protocol. The protocol says, I'm good and I'm happy to talk to you. And the other protocol says, yeah, that sounds great, let's go for it. It's just a handshake and then it's done. And that thing then has access to another network and another thing. But if you put blockchain in, it can't do that unless you agree. It's totally secure.
It sounds a bit scary, a bit Big Brother-ish, knowing that everything that you're doing is being traced and tracked or put into some big data central point. Now, if you're looking for those anomalies, which I always think is very interesting, is what's wrong with this picture? That's very interesting on the human interaction behavior. I think that people aren't using that enough when they're investigating analytics or looking for those differences.
Yeah, I think the difference in the patent I put in is that you control your identity, you control your circle of Internet of Things, you control your home Internet of Things. It's not accessible unless you give access. I think major corporations would be happy just to have access to all your data. I think we as humans need to decide how much freedom we're willing to give up in order to gain all these benefits. But then again, if you ask people how many people read the terms and conditions of the last app they downloaded to their phone, you'll probably get a very small number of people. That's the balancing act. We kind of want to have these facilities, but there is a level of loss of how we currently live, and there's a level of gain. But as I say, my version of this allows you to control who has access. I think one of the things that really jumped out at me from what Shodan's doing, which is giving people access to other people's Internet of Things devices through a search engine, which is incredibly scary because people don't reset standard passwords, is that we need to have a secondary locking mechanism where we decide what comes into our world, what we allow to be part of our Internet of Things.
But if we reject all those terms and conditions and, let's say, just mild invasion, then you don't have those things. I don't know any application or anything that I use today where I have complete access. Even with all the points in Europe about the privacy, you still don't have that privacy.
No, and the thing is, as you mentioned at the beginning, Big Brother is watching. Well, Big Brother has been watching for a very long time. It's the main job of Big Brother. And the thing is that Big Brother essentially can't cope with the amount of data that it's receiving and only flags certain parts of that data. If you're not involved in anything illegal, and then actually you're of no interest at all. The notion of the levels of freedom that we think we have are not what we've got. We have a level of freedom certainly higher than a lot of the rest of the world, but that comes at a cost of being watched to make certain we don't suddenly go insane. It's a balancing act. When I say that your Internet of Things should be controlled by you, I'm not talking about software. To be quite honest with you, in the future, there isn't going to be very much software, because I don't need software to manage my home if my home manages itself. If the heating system recognizes when I'm in the building, now there'll be machine-to-machine software, but actual applications that we now use to maybe manage our heating from a remote location or to look at our houses, it's kind of not really that important anymore when the house protects itself.
Yeah, I think people aren't recognizing the amount of what you're saying is machine to machine working, whether it be in industry, in home, for example, any retail environment, the ability for even a mall to connect their information to say this person purchased it, this one, and this one, and be able to use that data together. We're just at the infancy.
That's kind of yes, kind of no. I think generally people are less aware of it, but I mean, why do companies have store cards? Because they want to track your spending behaviors. They want to do some forecasting on how you respond to new product launches. And that's why they give you points. It's not because you're a customer, but because you're a mappable customer. And that's been going on for a long time. The notion of things working without us being engaged. I remember talking to someone from one of the white goods companies, and he said, we had washing machines in the 1950s that would phone up for support when they were running into problems with efficiency. They were too expensive to put into people's homes, so they went into laundromats. And I just think, that all of these things are going on anyway, but the thing that's changing now is people are becoming aware. I worked on a big data system in 2007 that links everything together, 144 databases. And my job was actually to work out what the digital products would be, because you link all these databases together and, well, what are they for? Sort of 40% of all the data is available to the security services because no one else should have that data. But then again, they don't buy it either. They assume that they can gather it themselves. I then, within 3 years of doing that project, worked on the UK National Census project. And I spoke to the head of the Office of National Statistics and I said, I can gather all this data without asking anyone. And he just looked at me in a shocked look. And I said, well, all this data already exists somewhere. It's just a question of data mining it. Why would you do a census when you can gather the data automatically and not spend all of this money creating a new system? But actually, it's just the way that the British government do things. They actually want to create these systems. I suppose that goes back again to civil liberties. How can all this information exist? Because it's been made available by various data owners because people didn't read terms and conditions.
Yep, exactly. And my point on the connected is there's that marketplace that I think is just starting what you're talking about is bringing all that data together, is the partnerships that need to be developed to really take those data, because the more you connect it together and the more that you develop those relationships between the data, the more information that it can disclose and that you can build off of it and become this entity at different layers. There are so many different layers.
I think the problem is that what we have is internets of things rather than internet of things. The large companies are still fighting the VHS Betamax war, but they're using Internet of Things for it. They still want to own the most and therefore have the most share of the potential income from it. But actually, realistically, they can't, because we are very brand-orientated cultures. We focus on certain brands doing certain things well. We don't necessarily go to one brand for all of our things. But to get a realistic experience of and use of all the data related to a home, it's going to involve 5 or 6 major corporations, and they're going to have to work together.
Exactly. This has been a very interesting set of topics. How do people reach out to you if they want to chat with you, find out more?
I do use LinkedIn. I'm actually one of the first million users in the world of LinkedIn. I'm Karl Smith 2. I was Karl Smith 1, but I managed to mess that up. And there you go, a learning process. I'm also on Twitter, User Experience U. Happy to converse.
Great. Thank you so much for being with me today, Karl.
Thank you very much.
I want to thank you so much for listening today. If you love this podcast, please do share it with your friends and colleagues, and please leave a review on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher, because it makes a difference for circulation. For the show notes and other great info, enter your email into the mailing list at techleaderstoday.com. Thank you.